Hi, everybody. What do we mean when we talk about freedom? What do we mean when we talk about fractional freedom? For the past 10 years, I have thought a lot about freedom, but mostly in the context of slavery. I have wondered what it means, or what it would have meant, to claim freedom as a woman who is enslaved for herself and for her family. When I'm at a dinner party and people ask me what I do, I say, I'm a historian of slavery. That's generally a conversation killer, as most people feel very uncomfortable making small talk about such a heavy topic. And so what I do as they are looking forward to getting away from me is I tell them a story, and the story generally goes like this. We know that over 12 million people left the African continent for the New World as part of the slave trade. Many of those people did not survive. Approximately 2 million did not survive the Middle Passage. However, of those 10 million people, less than 500,000 came to the United States. That's 5%. Yet what we know about slavery in the New World is vastly disproportionate to the totality of the experience of African slaves in the Americas. The brunt of the scholarly conversations, the movies, the things that you know, the abolitionist movement is all US focused. But what about the other 9.5 million people who came to the Americas? What were their lives like? Where did they go? What was it like to claim freedom for them? As a legal historian of slavery, I work with legal codes. And I won't go into, sort of nerdy details about legal cultures of 16th and 17th century Spanish America, but I do want to highlight a couple things that are important to my story. One is, slaves had legal personality, or what we would call the ability to sue in court. Slaves could marry, and their owners had to respect their marriages. Slaves could earn wages, and those wages they used to purchase their own freedom. 75% of the women who I study and work with in the centuries and the places that I work with bought their own freedom. This is an important, this is an important thing for you to think through when you think about slavery. This is a code from the 13th century that drives home the point that the civil law created more paths to freedom than the common law. Now, unfortunately, I cannot, even though I really wish I could, I cannot take you physically to Peru this evening. I can take you visually there. Many of you may not think about Africans in the context of Peru, right? You'll think about Machu Picchu, or you will think about the magnificent faces and visages of the Andean Cordillera. But it might be interesting to you to know that in the 1600s, Lima was a majority black city. Most of the city's magnificent architectural designs, it was, their monasteries, their palaces, their gardens were all maintained by slave labor. When I started doing research in the archives, I read a case brought by a young woman named Ana de Velasco. And Ana went to court to file a complaint against her master. She asked for a new owner by filing a petition alleging that her owner was lustful and had withheld her wages. In her petition, she asked to be placed in a new position that allowed her 2 hours a day to attend to her litigation, which, as she claimed, was the customary amount of time that she would need on a daily basis to attend to her legal affairs. Now, there's a lot here, about her owner and the scandalous. He was like lascivious and all of that, so he was lustful. And, here she is outing him and talking about their illegitimate children to a panel of his peers. But it was the assurance that she said that she needed 2 hours a day to attend to her litigation, which as a lawyer, we know that that's probably right. But, and also the assurance that it would be respected, that was exciting to me. Nowhere in the US could I ever have found a petition like this. So I began digging deeper and deeper, and over the next 10 years, I found many women like Ana de Velasco. It was dragged into daily dramas and stories full of passion and the messiness of interpersonal relationships as people like Ana negotiated fractions of freedom over their time and over their lives in bondage. So where do I find these things? Where do I find these dramas, these legal dramas? These treasured finds are the result of painstaking research through crumbling and old folios. I actually drive this man crazy over the past 10 years as I ask him to bring me more and more folios so that I can find new dramas and new stories that I can share with you. This is what historians call the allure of the archive. So, I've also gone through many readers. I might have started at point 1. I can't tell you what I am at right now. So this is the cast of colonial Latin American history. These are the guys that conquer stuff. They rebel, guys. They find new republics and write constitutions. The guys. This is the standard cast of colonial Latin American history. My folks are people like Ana. My subjects are people like Ana who work in a domestic slaveholding household, and I approach this site as a raucous, crowded, noisy, political site. This, for me, is a site of politics, as our Congress right now. This is a place of every single piece of dirty laundry that you could imagine that this woman is hanging out. This is a place of tension, joy, envy, desire. This is a place of aggression and sadness and grief. And I don't want to do this in this sort of upstairs, downstairs sort of masterpiece theater, type of thing. But I really want to look at the household as a political site, a site in which relationships are forged. And these are thick relationships. These are robust relationships. And I want to use that site to unpack these very, very easy conflations that we make of law and justice, or even that sort of uncomfortable hyphen between master and slave. And I really want to think about all of these things together through the household. So, to do so, and I really have to do this, but this is a great story, and I'm just going to rush us through it. It was the 4th chapter of my book, so I'm really going to rush us through it. This is the story of Boudreau and Madea. Okay, so boy meets girl. Very, very bare bones. Boy meets girl. Boy falls madly in love with girl. Boy asks for her hand in marriage, the mother, for her hand in marriage. It's the 1600s, they can't go to Vegas. And the problem is that the girl is owned, she's a slave. And she's owned by the wealthy and formidable Doña Beatriz. The mother goes straight away to Doña Beatriz, and she says, look, let's keep this real. A wealthy Spaniard of good birth wants to marry Madea. Of course, her name is Madea, right? Like I was going to sing for you, I just met a girl named Madea. But I didn't sing that because I shouldn't sing. I should leave that to the jazz ensemble. Anyway, so Beatriz, right, she should have been down with the program. Like she should have said, oh, this is true. I free Madea. Anyway, she doesn't. So I encounter Boudreau in the archive suing for annulment on the basis of fraud. The court asks Madea, why didn't you tell Boudreau that you were enslaved? And she said, he never asked. So she was right, actually, So the point here about this story is not whether, Boudreau is dealing with a full deck, he's clearly quite dim, right? Or that the community covers up for Madea and they're that's not the point. The point is for me that Beatriz and the mother and Madea and Pedro, they're all part of a very, very close-knit community. Beatriz is very much part of her mother, of Juana's life. Juana's the mother. Despite their relationship as human property, they pray together every day. They eat lunch together every day. They were at each other's bedside. When Beatriz died, which I found after, harassing that poor man, she died at home in her bed, surrounded by her confessor and all her family, which included Juana and Madea. So the point is that Juana didn't get her freedom and say, peace out, I'm not going to see you anymore. She still remained in the life of Beatriz. Early modern worlds were intimately and deeply intertwined. There were no free agents wielding their autonomy and their individualism in this time. People's survival depended on their position within multi-generational households, and those carried dependencies. Those dependencies grew out of the drudgery of care work, and that came with legal purchase in court. My goal has been here to focus on the power of these relationships that tend to be relegated in the study of slavery as an economic system and, all of that stuff, has tended to be relegated to the side of mere sentiment. None of this suggests that any of this was easy, and it was not the result of arduous work. But it does suggest that in order for us to understand slavery, we have to understand freedom. And we have to think about fractional freedom. So before you heard this, you would have thought, like if I asked you, because this is what professors do, like they randomly say, okay, what do you think about freedom? And somebody lifts their hand up and says, well, I don't actually have a very well thought out philosophical and sophisticated answer, but I think it probably means that I have autonomy over my time and control over my body and the ability to do with it what I want. And then I would have said, well, what do you think about slavery? And then you would have said the antithesis of that, right? You would have said the lack of autonomy and the lack of control. But my goal in these few minutes that we've had together is to not just to complicate questions and categories, because we're wonky academics and that's what academics do. We complicate things. But my goal has been for you to think beyond the label and to suggest that this is where people lived. 90% of people who were enslaved lived in this zone, right? This is where they lived. This is where they loved. This is where they fought. This is where they struggled. This is why I call what I do the accrual of fractional freedoms. Anna claimed the wages that she earned. She claimed the right to her children. She recouped her dignity in that zone. And so if I want you to, what most of all I want to do is for you to step away from the label of thinking, oh, Anna was a slave, and think about how she lived in that gray zone. And I also want to reiterate that 90% of the people who came to the Americas lived in that gray zone.